Gross describes the freedom which is not just of mind, but of body, of movement, of taking action. The female collective, in relation to spatial sound practice, here with the icosahedral loudspeaker, takes such ideas and runs with them, literally, into new spaces, places, and audiences. These actions, I underline the use of the word action, and the relational networks and nodes of our practices reach out and are reached back into in ways which feel new, and they seem to be new. If we looked at the archive from Delia Derbyshire to Daphne Oram, from Elaine Ruddick to Wendy Carlos and even Pauline Oliveros, we would understandably consider most compositional practices in technology-based music to be isolated and singular, not a gender-neutral framing. This framing is not applied exclusively to a particular gender, but here we focus on the female. Commonly, women are represented as lone outsider composers, exceptional outliers. See Rogers, 2016. So why is this to be problematized? Firstly, it's reductive. Secondly, it risks objectification and fetishization through the male gaze. And thirdly, it lends itself far too conveniently to commodification, not to be treated suspiciously. See Morgan 2016-2017. For a critique of internet-based numbered lists presenting female composers from the archive, see Rogers 2016. And fourthly, this representation of the female subjugates other contributions many women have made to the practice, theory, and evolution of the field. When women come together to work, it's often not represented archivally, though it's at least more often documented, if not represented. That form of contribution often just doesn't make the cut in the historical narrative. Rogers states that, quote, a dearth of primary source materials can result in historical narratives that, if they depict women at all, portray them as isolated exceptions to the norm, rather than as key contributors to the development of electronic music cultures, end quote. Rogers goes on to discuss the exposition that Abby Bliss gives on the curious lone outsider female in experimental music, which poetically introduces the patch bay nun, a term that I love. Who is she? A socially amputated, sexually contained savant with an interior gaze and only a gigantean in both size and complexity, a gigantean machine for intellectual companionship and even emotional solace. This is my own embellishment, in case not obvious, but it's not unconsidered, even if it lacks subtlety. According to many, see Dobson 2018, Smith, Toretti and Piper 2018, Born and Devine 2015, and so on, compositional practices are gendered, and we, the authors, collectively and also always individually, know that in direct terms. Technology, according to Born and Devine, has exacerbated such imbalances. And all of us work within that context, within a male-dominated context, though it itself is in an interesting point in its geotemporal history. Being women, we are aware of the inequalities we're faced with, whether obvious or in micro-expressions. We can't forget those because we live them. It's easier to forget, or never indeed to know, the inequalities which don't directly impact us. Rogers identifies intersections and inequalities between gender, race, socioeconomic status, geographic location, and in, quote, access to resources, the amount of time available for creative pursuits, and the aesthetic contours of sonic expressions, end quote. This is common sense, but worth underlining. For those of us with access and time, it's easy to forget that not everybody is so privileged. It's also upon us to, as I put it, be in remembering that, quote, women who have archives of their own have typically occupied positions of racial and economic privilege, holding university positions or institutional affiliations, end quote. That puts me in touch with a certain discomfort around my relative privilege. Privilege isn't always apparent, and not because it can't be, but because we can all be ignorant to it. To work into the nuances of our awareness and our understandings around privilege, we have to have fuzzy boundaries, leakages. We have to let things in. That can be uncomfortable. I had a conversation recently with a white male artist about the sense of illegitimacy he felt he had in making work as a white middle-class male. I'm paraphrasing that. No doubt he said it more eloquently. I wanted to take that in. It helped because he's articulate and demonstrates vulnerability. It also helped because it didn't bother me. Why would it? I'm still the relatively underprivileged person in that conversation, so I don't have discomfort about that awareness. However, it does complicate the narrative. It lends plurality and information and subjectivities, how to integrate these whilst retaining a sense of individuality, his and mine. Perhaps a conceptual structure, a container of sorts, could do the job, somewhere where things can be held without taxonomical delimitation. We contest that compositional practices in technology-based music need not be isolated nor singular. We base that contestation on experience and literature and a deep curiosity about what plural practices can become. If there's a zeitgeist that supports the female collective in some way, great. It's overdue in all reasonableness. Any unreasonableness felt by those who perceive themselves as its targets, just know that, at least from our plural perspective, it's impersonal. A period of disorientation may be needed when a system is lopsided. Better that we don't add further offence to feed into polarities. Surely we are weary of such forces. Within this presentation, you will hear a diversity in our voices and the nodes we occupy as we pivot around our ideas, inhabiting different perspectives as we consider them. This is a freedom which we are unaware of until we articulate it, perhaps, with some kind of movement, form, action. This collision is not particularly intentional, but we have worked tacitly in this way in our performances, collaborations, and our sharing. We've also recorded and constructed this presentation asynchronously, a decision based not on reason, but unspoken, and I have to say highly efficient, feeling and relational subjectivities. This is our default, at least in part. We work well despite being spatially and at times temporally distributed. The unsingular pervades life, which is itself contingent. If we can inhabit these multiplicities, it makes for richness in the material fabric of life. At times, this happens first in our minds and then our practices. At other times, first in our practices and then minds. Thank you for listening, for providing an impetus for us to articulate these impulses, which always partly elude articulation and are all the more interesting as a result of that. As you listen to us, our own listening changes. The two are inseparable, and the relation between them that makes them so also makes them plural. Perhaps that is, at least partly, why, as bell hooks put it, listening is counter-hegemonic.
When we often reflect on the electroacoustic tradition in the UK and beyond, this is often unified with academic institutions. This institutional setting within high art or highly educated spaces is generally heavily tied within a Western music tradition, and therefore, as we sit facing forwards within a silent room, what role does this play? Previously, such loudspeakers systems would often tour and adapt to existing concert venues, but over time, more and more specialised purpose-built spaces for electroacoustic music have been constructed, with examples including the Beast Dome at the University of Birmingham and Sonic Lab at SARC in Belfast, just to name a few, meaning that institutions have increasingly remained within their purpose-built spaces rather than taking their touring systems to other spaces. And considering this, often these are conceived as ideal spaces for the presentation of this genre. What does this mean, not only for our audience, but for the genre more widely? The portability of the Eco, one speaker, amplifier and playback system, plus reflectors if required, enables artists to transport their work to any place, indoor and outdoor, with access to power being the only requirement. The ease of portability of moving one loudspeaker over an array in terms of functionality, costs, time, manpower offers a solution to creating 3D sonic imagery of electroacoustic music anywhere at any time. In addition, the portability of the system allows for us to learn more about our compositions and how they behave in different spaces. Moving the system from the studio to the church, a recent concert that we did collectively, for instance, transformed the work sonically via activation of the acoustic architecture. Such explorations provide an opportunity to interrogate our sonic material and understand the effective methods of working with the eco in different spaces, and collectively accepting that this often requires fluidity and openness to tweak and often accept the presentation of the work in different acoustics. Thus, the ICO opens up new possibilities for exploration and creativity in our practices. Considering the role of place further, venues can significantly affect a person's experience. They may enhance, disrupt, or even blend to form part of an artwork. For varying musical formats, from a traditional performance in a concert hall setting to a site-specific composition presented outdoors or within a gallery or larger space. Each space may provide different and even new experiences for the audience. As a collective, we are keen to explore additional ways to move outside of the concert hall in order to diversify and reach new audiences. As composer Francois Barrier states, should we not rethink the ritual of the concert so as to stimulate curiosity and listening appetite, to overcome resistance and prejudice? We need to find ways and means of creating an atmosphere conducive to sympathetic listening, the only sort that can set up a complicity with a listener, a complicity he needs to be receptive. And furthermore, the eco is changing the process and presenting works in diverse settings through an inherently feminist perspective. Marginalised communities are explicitly considered, and a marginalised community referring to a group at risk of being pushed to the margins, often excluded or ignored. From churches, museums to open spaces, we are striving to reach and engage with new audiences and artists. In particular, those who have met and we have collaborated with are often unaware of the possibility that electroacoustic music and or electronic music is an open and accessible art form to them. Through providing new opportunities for engagement in diverse ways offers new modes of communication and understanding. As a collective, we are continually questioning if we are struggling for audiences and artists to come to us, why don't we go to them? And how can we best achieve this? How can we challenge the traditional formats which have come before? The eco also demands a relinquishment of control. Women are well suited to deal with these aspects of composition and reproduction, having been historically disempowered. We are open to taking feedback in a supportive environment and understand that knowledge is relational and that control is an illusion. We are open to others, more likely to share and to question ourselves.
Through being involved in this collective of women working in spatial sound with the ICO loudspeaker within the Sound and Image Research Group at the University of Greenwich, we have created a safe space to work in and explore ideas. When we talk about the safe space, we mean a place where we can exchange knowledge, support, and encourage each other and be transparent in our working processes. This is a space where we can work without judgment, away from the male gaze, and without being in solitude. Representations of women working with music technologies in the past have often highlighted the idea of a singular woman alongside technology or group of males. We are redefining what it means to be a female working and composing with music technology. Through relationality, or the connectedness of working with the ICO loudspeaker, we have created a socially mediated practice between composers that allows us to share knowledge and have freedom from established methodologies and forms of composition. As the ICO is a relatively new technology for all of us, we are starting from a similar place. We are all working with the ICO to explore the spatial possibilities and learn about a new way of composing, from the inside projecting outwards. This provides us with a sense of freedom to explore this technology and no expectations on how to work with it. For example, I'm exploring the use of only field recordings with the ICO and investigating what types of sounds work best with it. natural ambience, more directional sounds, electromagnetic sounds, and contact mic recordings as an example. Whereas others are using generated sounds and taking a more acousmatic approach. We're working individually, but we are in a group of women who are doing the same. It seems silly that we don't talk about it openly. Inevitably, all of our compositional outputs will be different anyway. We feel comfortable sharing approaches and methodologies. For example, Brona sent me her template for working with the ICO at home in binaural. If we need help or a second set of ears, we feel comfortable asking each other and supporting one another. It's very rare to have the space to ask about plugins, technical things, and silly questions, and not to feel judged by others. This sort of support and encouragement is something that I think a lot of us are experiencing for one of the first times. Sharing knowledge, being transparent, and sharing this space has been extremely valuable for all of us. And I know for myself that without the help of these women, I would not have progressed or learnt about the ICO so quickly. By sharing our knowledge and experience with each other, we're helping each other to develop our skills and knowledge and succeed in working with the ICO. I have been working with the ICO since February this year, and from personal experience, I have felt very comfortable and supported working with this group of women. I have had the space to experiment with sounds, learn about different approaches to working with the ICO from my colleagues, had the support and encouragement from the group, and felt that there was a sense of freedom away from the weight of determined expectations that I normally feel. I have had the freedom to explore ideas and ways of working with this technology that's new to me, and this has allowed me to have more creative expression. It's allowed me to explore the loudspeaker and my own practice. I think the best part of being in this collective of women is the sense of plurality and relationality. We hope to be role models for others by redefining what it means to be a female working and composing with music technology. For me, a female collective in spatial sound would be a place to explore new ideas, share technical knowledge, and feel connected with other female artists when working in the studio.
Following on from Bourne and Devine's 2015 consideration of how to overcome a focus on the problem of women, as they put it, we put forward a view of the strength of the collective in spatial sound composition and practice, and argue that women are uniquely well placed to work collectively. Whether we're talking about composing together quite literally, which we're doing and enjoying and recommend, or working collaboratively through sharing our love of certain synths or plugins, our workflows, our automation techniques, reflections on our practice, we bear witness to the strength of this approach in doing this. We also notice an inherent diversity in our compositional voices, which further distinguishes the female collective. For us to maintain coherence alongside this diversity, the collective becomes our container. It provides specific practical constraints and possibilities, performance opportunities, research outputs, public engagement, as well as just informal chances to be with one another. We are doing the woman's work of coming together to make. It needn't be glamorous, and we needn't hide our vulnerability or egoic fragility, which, as composers and artists, we may feel a greater need to do when working alone. With the collective, we feel held. We feel heard. In the last month, we performed our work in 2 concerts. After each, we've been approached by audience members telling us we're approachable. These include, but are not limited to, women. The response to a programme of diverse compositional voices has been very positive, but not without critics, and those critics have come exclusively from within compositional communities. Does that surprise us? No. Could it intimidate, curtail, or limit us individually and perhaps normally? I use that term in brackets. Yes, it could. Collectively, no. That is the female collective at work at present. In time, it might serve less of a defensive function. But for now, our collective container forms a protective barrier to the impacts of systemic disempowerment. The female collective embodies Gross's freedom to, rather than a more oppositional and limiting freedom from. It's full of possibility and levity, of flux, and out of necessity, it is our safeguarding exoskeleton. The female collective answers previous calls to, quote, encourage and open up spaces for novel, diverse, and as yet unforeseen articulations between subject positions and technological assemblages in digital music and sound art, end quote.